Haven't heard.
Okay, well, if you, Mr. Treasurer, if you'd like to call the roll, please.
I will. Ms. Hudson?
I'm here.
Mr. Cole?
Present.
Ms. Saranen? Mr. Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Peretti? Mr. Robinson?
Here.
And Mr. Stewart? You have 4 out of 7, so you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for making time on one of our first sunny days in a while. So we'll get out of this windowless basement as soon as we can. So first order of business, if we could turn to the March 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second. Here's both. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. So we'll do 2 things today. We'll have certainly our finance report first, and then we'll talk about the latest on the update with the FY17 budget and the options that we talked through last week, or at our last meeting. The status of the 5-year forecast, it's all sort of lumped together, and that'll be the main portion of our meeting. And I think with that, Stan has sent out a placeholder meeting to do a follow-up in 2 weeks. And I just ask everybody to put that on their calendar. I appreciate you making extra time, but given the timing and of this, but from a legal standpoint and otherwise, that'll help us send, from the Finance Committee, send this material out to the board and those who are otherwise interested, so we can continue to move this process forward. So with that, Stan, we'll do the short financial report.
Short, good, okay. I'll do my best. Yes, we'll begin with an update for the end of March, and I'll somewhat walk through the MD&A discussion. So you know, when we posted these out on the web, I believe in this presentation there are about 33 slides, not all of which I really intend to go through, but they have good information on them, so I share them, but for discussion and presentation purposes, I may move quickly, not to be rude or certainly not to hide anything, but we put it out there, but kind of want to jump to some totals because this information then it rolls forward into the overall discussion that we're going to have about the FY17 budget and that 5-year work that Scott and everyone else has done, and then how that impacts the forecast. We've ended the month year to date with almost $690 million in revenues and a little over $606 million in expenditures. Here's a breakdown of those. I'll move on. Breakdown of expenditures as well are listed. In aggregate, the variances year to date are about 1.3% or $8.7 million in revenues, and expenditures continue to run under plan by about 1.5% or $9.4 million. Yeah, the combination of those both moving in what we would call favorable directions in terms of we like to have more cash than less cash. We are ahead of plan on where we are with cash. As I just mentioned, I wanted to point this out. On operating, or in total, we're at about 1.3% variance. I map out for you, as I have in the past, the variances month to month. And when we break them down, we'll see that the biggest change since last month is in the area of local receipts, and that has to do with the receipt of property taxes. If you recall, advances were coming in somewhat different than they were last year, and they were received in March. This is the picture of property taxes month to month. So we exceeded our estimate in March. And year to date, we're pretty much done with property taxes. Our plan called for 4.76 million. We're at 4.67 million. Wrong school district. 407.6 million was in the plan, and 406.1 is what we received, and we expect that to hold true for the balance of the year.
We want to add those additional zeros.
Zeros, that does help. Looking at state revenue, we had a little bump in March, but we anticipate that to, again, as we have here in the past several months, predicted that it'll remain fairly flat throughout the balance of the year. We'll end up at 302, as far as I can project at this point, over the 293 that we had in the plan. And that happens to be the biggest contributor to additional revenues. And you'll see here, when we look at non-operating revenues, there's some offsets there. You know, those are the cash flow items that don't necessarily come in where we plan because they're very hard to predict. Looking on the expenditure side, again, 9.4 under plan, 1.5%. The breakdown, operating expenditures, 0.5% off, pretty good. Now, there are variances within each line, as you can see. Personnel, our largest line item, running at about 1.3% under plan, which for our comfort level, since it's 5.3 million on such a large dollar item, we're very comfortable with that. I will tell you that with these kinds of changes and what we estimate for the balance of the year, we've rolled that into the plan so that, in essence, the base for projecting the future years has been lowered. So that positive variance doesn't get exacerbated out into the future. We've taken that into account. Again, variances year-to-date on a monthly basis, and you can see we've more often than not consistently run under plan. Compared with last month, the biggest change is in non-personnel from a negative 2.5 under plan to 2.3 over plan, and that has to do with the fact that we did get settlement this month, and we posted deductions for county auditor and treasurer's fees, but in the plan it called for it in May. So, or April or May? May? Mike, do you remember? April or May? When did we call? I think we called for it in May, but it came through in March as it should, and so we'll see that work itself out. But that's just a timing issue on those. Yes, sir.
Can you explain for me again the 8.1 million in December?
The 3-pay month, 31st.
Oh, thank you. I can't, but Scott can. Thank you very much. It's the 3-pay month. We put it for January, and it actually occurred in December.
Yeah, I knew that was okay. Thank you. Just a reminder.
Thank you, Scott.
So it levels out.
Yes,
I
it does.
remember now.
Yeah, that's how we ended up going back to under plan for January. Again, a breakdown of the non-personnel items, change in the variance from February to March, and as you can see, it's in the other object category, and that's where the county auditor and treasurer's fees are. We were running under plan, now we're running over plan, but our plan was this. And you can see the spike in May. So we'll still show that variance in April, and May, it'll work itself out for the balance of the year. We always, as you know, like to look at charter schools and do a forecast of those. The purple line indicates what we expect the actuals to be. As you recall, once again, the plan had a spike at the end of the year, so we don't anticipate that happening. So our variance year-to-date will fall. At this point, we think we'll come in about 1.7 over our plan. That will likely be over what's appropriated, but as I've said before, we have under plan in other areas that we can reallocate appropriation accordingly. So there won't be, we don't anticipate this causing an increase in our appropriation resolution. We always compare to what the state's giving us, and as you can see, that school foundation report has varied over time, and now we're looking at, in this particular case, the math worked out in rounding to 1.6 million, so we'll be in that 1.6 to 1.7 as far as we know. Just a picture of our monthly flows. You can see those timing issues jump out at you fairly clearly. Year-to-date, though, and I realize the magnitude of the graph is in hundreds of millions of dollars, so movement there is not visually very apparent, but we are very much tracking right on plan. That's March. And at this point in the year, because we're getting ready to do a May update to the forecast, what we do is sit down and do that projection to the end of the year. In terms of the fiscal 16, and then also look at that in terms of its impact of rolling into the 5-year forecast. What I provided for you in what I call green bar report landscape format in the back of the MD&A is all on one page, something that I'm going to show you bits and pieces of, a few columns at a time on these slides. What you have as an attachment walks you from the plan through what we project for the balance of the year, calculates the variances there from the fiscal year end projected versus the plan. We also then pull in on that attachment the October 5-year forecast and compare it to the fiscal year end projection, those variances, and then again compare the forecast to the plan to see what kind of modifications we made there. So you've got 3 documents. Over time, we make those comparisons to hone in on what's going to roll forward into the forecast for 16. Again, the detail is here, but I'll jump to the total page for revenues. Overall, against the plan, about 2.3 million above plan, or 2.29%. Is that right? Yes. And you can see that the other sources of financing, those cash flow items, are under plan by 7.7 million, offsets what was going on in the operating revenues, which came in about 10 million above plan. On expenditures, operating expenditures again forecasted to come in about 1.75% under plan. And in the non-operating area, a more significant percentage change, but only it's $12 million under plan, so that contributes again to coming in with more cash at the end of the year than we anticipated. Overall, in terms of ending cash, our projection at this point, subject to change, we still have 3 months to go. We had planned for about 97 million in cash. We believe it'll be close to 125 million. So we've been as both conservative and as aggressive as we can in that projection so that we let it roll into the forecast and roll into this budgeting process and prepare the best picture we can for the ensuing update to the forecast and planning on a 5 to 6 year basis. Very quickly, the impact on the 5-year forecast going all the way back to October. In total revenues, we pick up about $4.6 million, $4.1 million, or about 0.54, so we're pretty close to the plan. You can see there, this is where we show the forecast, the far right-hand column, the forecast versus the plan, and these are done in 2 different time frames. So we had about 5.8 million more in the forecast than we did the plan. We made an adjustment, and you can just see that over time how that has created some other variances. Other operating sources we didn't change between the plan and the forecast, and in the end, relative to the forecast, we're going to come in about 3.5 million under the forecast, which is still just a 0.45 variance. These variances are all under 1%. Expenditures, this is where we're seeing the larger variances. Against the forecast, operating expenditures coming in about 22 million under the forecast, about 2.71 under. We had increased the forecast about 7.8 million back in October, and so that contributes to that. When we actually project for the end of the year, you're going to see a larger variance here than you would versus the plan. On other financing sources, you can see another about 12 million coming in under plan, very similar to against the forecast. And overall on expenditures, about 33.9 million projected under the plan, or under the forecast, about 4%. As I mentioned, these are 3 documents that are prepared over time, so I thought I'd give you a picture chronologically of when these occur and what those variances look like. So we began in August putting the spending plan, the month-to-month plan together for our monthly comparisons at 796 million in revenue. When we got to the October forecast, we made some adjustments that hopefully I explained back then. And that was an increase of about 5.8 million, or a 0.73% tweaking to the forecast. So we included that in the October forecast. And then after the forecast, as you can see, when we get to where we're projecting fiscal 16 to actually end, they're coming in 3.4 million under, as I mentioned, about a 0.44% difference. So where we started from the plan to where we end with our projection at this point is about 2.3 million plus to the plan and 0.29% variance. So very small tweaks. I realize we're talking about 2 million or 3 million or $5 million movements, but it's a very small percentage that we tweak based upon the best information we have at that time. And I'll remind you that we're still estimating where we're going to end the year. As I always have prefaced many presentations on the finances, the only thing I can tell you for absolutely sure is that the numbers you'll see 3 months from now will be different than the numbers you see today. So that's a for sure. On the expenditure side, we started at about 839 million in August for in the plan. We tweaked that a bit up to 846 in the forecast in October, and as you can see, we're coming in under by 26.2 or 33.9, depending on which basis you use, which are 3 to 4% variances on the expenditure side. If you factor out that non-operational cash flow, those variances that are usually, they come in at the top and go out at the bottom, that's about 12 million each in those variances. So on an operational basis, we're within 1.7% of the original plan and about 2.6%.
Does that mean that your revenue was actually greater as well, though?
They should balance. Sometimes they don't. It just depends upon the timing of what we've done in the prior year often comes back in the current year, and then we have to move money out at the end of the year. So things like advances, if you have to advance the same amount every year, they should wash, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. And that's, did you have a question?
No, well, I was going to say, so based on the experience with the cash flow issues and, the changes in expenditures, would you recommend any changes to next year's, to the forecast as you adjust it for the next fiscal year?
Two answers to that. Probably most importantly for me relative to this part of the report where we're doing monthly comparisons is making sure that, quite frankly, there were some things that happened in 15 that weren't going to happen in 16. The county auditor and treasurer's fees, things like that were timing issues, the 3-pay plan. I think if we hone in on that, focus in on that, and make sure that if we're going to use last year, that is in fact how those expenditures are going to behave month to month, then we won't see those variances. And they'll be more meaningful other than the plan wasn't that good. Get more meaningful. We don't, by the way, delve down into asking budget managers to do a month-to-month plan. I mean, my best indicator is what happened last year. We are at the point, though, with some of the items, if you notice, purchase services, supplies, and materials running under plan by a fair amount. We are going and identifying a few lines and going back and talking to budget managers and saying, for instance, utilities. I believe it's natural gas that's running under plan. Well, okay, we didn't have as mild a winter because we have to understand that so that we know, well, when we get to this budgeting process, should they have X or 80% of X in the budget? And in those instances, we tend to, even though they run under plan, not modify the next plan because we have to allow for that. If we have a bad winter, we better have enough cushion in there to pay for that. And allow for that.
Right.
So we are having those conversations, but not on a month-to-month basis. We get to this point and say, well, here we are now. Do we have an explanation? Fuel's another one we're having a conversation about as well. So we do delve into that, but again, not on a month-to-month basis. So one is make sure that last year is predicting this year, and then number two, how it affects the forecast is allowing this information to roll forward into the 16 column. And you'll see, for instance, in personnel, we changed the basis for the forecast in terms of continuation of current programs. I said in the October forecast, this is just current programs carried forward. Well, now when I've updated, and you'll see that in a minute, the first thing was, all right, back down personnel, recast based upon that lower estimate, what carry forward would be, the current program carry forward would be. And then we get into the aspirational budget items. Does that help?
It does. I would just ask it, or just ask it if you see, maybe to look at some of those items where they do have a particular cadence, or, there's a spending cadence to it that you'll, consider that in there. So, because I think even though I think that's good, it's just a percentage, it's a few percentage, they're still, they're big enough numbers. I don't want to say, well, 2% isn't a big deal, because it's still a big deal.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's a, and what I hope is that we gain an appreciation of what small percentage variances do dollar-wise.
Right.
And when we are doing projections, and I'm rounding to the nearest $100,000, 2% this way and 2% that way can be either an enjoyable experience and add $30 million to the cash balance, or a horrible evening with FAC trying to explain why it's less than what we thought.
Right.
And I know that there are large numbers, percentage-wise. Honing down on that sometimes becomes a little difficult, but we are having those conversations with budget managers, and I think that this is a ongoing process. So as we learn from these experiences, then that will certainly factor into the next iteration of this 5-year budget process.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just, great performance, fiscal stewardship, but there's a couple of categories, like capital outlays, we're spending substantially less. It seems like something there's a lot of demand for. What drove that underspend, and is that timing, or is it?
And I don't have an answer for you this evening on that. That's one of the line items we're delving into. And one of my worries is that money is appropriated, so we have to have that conversation and say, well, have you just delayed the expenditure, and that's going to occur in April or May or June? And I don't know that. Then my projection would be off. But those conversations are ongoing, but not completed at this point.
That's a good question. Maybe for the next meeting,
The supplies
that
and
item
some
we
of
could
those things that
just
we're-
find out if that's in the pipeline, but just still hasn't gone out yet.
All through your quarterly budget reviews as a process to help do this. Okay. We'll follow up on that.
That's good. Other questions for, go ahead.
That concludes my part, so if you have questions, feel free.
Other questions, welcome to Dom and Jody. I know you weren't just out enjoying the sun.
I was.
Yes, I'm sure. So,
I
with that,
guess
yes.
one other
Tim.
call out, just the expense associated with charter schools, et cetera, pretty much spot on. Is that like the enrollment was consistent, the cost per pupil? Do we have a sense of, it's a good outcome, fairly consistent? So is it that we hit it on all those marks, or were there higher enrollment and lower cost per, the mix was different, or?
I think actually, I'd have to go back and look at exactly what we used, but I think we're pretty good on adding students and projecting what the additional cost was. I think we're spot on both of those. And then because we look at our fund, as you see in that chart, we pull the state numbers. So that gives us a pretty good indication of what that aggregate number is. And so, very frankly, sometimes I'm not so sure I care the mix as much as I care whether or not I hit it. But I will show you in the aspirational budget, we made a major change in that line.
I was going to say, because that's where all the volatility was going forward.
Yeah.
Does this suggest that we're maybe getting more refined in our understanding, or?
Dr. Good, do you have thoughts on? It looked like you might want to say.
Our best predictor is just trend. Using trend, and that was what we did in a revision to that line item for the aspirational budget, is just use trend. It's just very difficult to predict.
That's a good question. Other questions on the monthly or the end of year projection? So some of this will, the end of year will then kind of meld into the next. I guess I would just, two things before we dive into the next piece. One, I would ask, so we're going to look at a number of things. We'll look at the budget, the end of year forecast, and, some tools to, based on our conversation of, we've pulling out general revenue, capital, other items, so some tools to do some predictive analysis on revenue. If we added, or if there was additional revenue added, what would that be? Just keep in mind, I think for purposes of FAC, it would be great to have our evaluation. I think this committee's evaluation for the board and others. Do you feel like this is an accurate tool? Is there anything else you'd like to see in this? Is the presentation clear? Where do you see that we need to add or change any of that data? So I just ask if we kind of look at this with that lens. And also, do you have questions about the forecast, et cetera? But we've been through a few of those now, I think. But Stan and Scott have done yeoman's work on putting all this together. And I want to ask too, just to be courteous to everybody in the back, can you all see the board okay? Okay. I don't mean here. Okay. Well, if you want to scoot up as well, please do. We'll try to project. Stan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda is a discussion about our budget and the 5-year forecast update. I'd like to just begin, I think Scott's done this numerous times when he begins, and I think it's a great idea, just to remind you that as we're talking mainly about numbers, dollars and cents, that all of this ties to our vision statement. And I want to keep that in mind, that as we look at this, behind every dollar there's a behavior, and we're going to show you what behaviors are in and aren't in terms of an update. What we've prepared here is, and I'll walk you through this, is to go from the forecast to the budget document aspirational, and then make some adjustments to get us to a point of a forecast that we feel comfortable adopting in May. But there's more to the ask than this, and you'll see as we get there what those items are. So I always like to keep in mind that this is our vision, and this is where all these numbers and the behaviors that they support are intended to head. In your handouts and what we made available on the internet is this format, very similar to the 5-year forecast. And this is the October 5-year forecast, and in the headers, what I wanted to demonstrate here is that the forecast, as it's currently put together, involves the 5 fiscal years of the current one, fiscal year 16 through fiscal year 20. Scott and all the work that we did on the budget is looking forward 1 year to fiscal 17 and going out to fiscal 21. So it's 1 more year than the forecast. But we do some things to bring some of those forecast numbers forward. So that's where we started. Probably heard a lot, and I have an arrow on there highlighting fiscal 18, the first year of our deficit. Back in October, we showed almost a $5 million deficit. That triggered a response by Ohio Department of Education. We wrote a response how we would address the deficit, and that's been taken care of. So let's fast forward, if you will, to what has transpired between October and then January through March and all the budget work, and what have we done. First thing is we did an update to fiscal 16 to project for the fiscal year end that we just discussed. We've used the fiscal 16 projection for personnel costs as a basis for 17 through 20. Again, like I said, current programming and staffing carried forward. The fiscal 17 to 20 revenue has been updated with latest numbers that we have that we'll be putting into the forecast. So the revenue has been modified a bit. Because fiscal 21 is not in the forecast model, as you can see, we just trended revenue. Simple trending to get an idea where that's headed for 21. In looking at the forecast, that forecast for personnel for 17 and 18 and included some assumed wage increases. So we input the actual ones, 2.2 in the base in 17, and then 17 thereafter versus what we had as 1 and 1 in the forecast. You'll see in our forecast, there's nothing in there for increases to base, no negotiated comment there out into the future. FY21 personnel was trended based upon 16 to 20. That after we adjusted for the 16 results, I then trended that out into 21. And then finally, we got around to all the work that Scott and others have done to get that aspirational budget in there. And this is not the first iteration. We've gone through several iterations of looking at that. We took the recommendation request, if you will, from FAC to pull out capital items that potentially could be funded from other sources, let's say a bond issue or a permanent improvement levy, yet to be decided. But we did pull those out, and did want to mention that the expenditures in the aspirational budget for textbooks have been pulled out. And then we added personnel only for 17, because personnel needed in the aspirational budget in 18, 19, 20, and 21 will have to be part of another ask budget to later to be discussed.
Sam?
Yes.
I know you're going to show it later, but
Yep.
when you say you pulled out the capital, we did leave in the capital that were essential, is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry, we prioritized, all of these removals were prioritized. Sorry, that's a good point.
But is it more a function of not going to spend it or just moving it to a capital allocation?
Moving it to a capital allocation. And if that funding source doesn't materialize, we'll have another conversation about what we're going to do about those capital items. Right. Okay? So it gets us to this. This printout. What is, I guess that's kind of an orange highlight, are ones that changed since the 5-year forecast. As you can see, pretty much everything changed except for, now school budgets weren't in the forecast, but they are in the aspirational budget. They're pullouts. So we list them separately. But this has been a full update to everything. Revenues, expenditures, our projection for 16, parts of the aspirational, and this is where it leads us. We believe we can adopt this as the update to the May forecast. You see that FY18 is now slightly positive, in large part due to the good performance in 16 carried forward. Allows us to add aspirational items into 17 and remain positive in 18.
So this has some, but not all the aspirational.
That's correct. I'm going to show you what it doesn't have. I'm not going to go back through all those budget presentations and say, well, remember this was the aspirate? We're not, I mean, I guess we could, but we're not prepared for that tonight. That took hours and hours to present. So I'm assuming that we've all got that base of knowledge of what the educational plan is over the next 5 years. That's an assume. That's our starting point.
And they were presented as priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. So essentially what's reflected in this budget are priority 1, not 2 and 3. With the exception of one person.
But this is still non-personnel, correct?
No, it's both.
It's both.
And just so you know, I know we talked about that first occurring deficit in 18 or now 19, and that has some trigger points. What's more important to me is a longer term, I think we should be doing long-term financial planning. So I look out in 20 and 21, and those are the deficits that we need to address. And the way school funding works, you'll see in a minute in a worksheet, that you can't wait till the last minute. That just is not a good place to be.
No.
So,
no, go ahead.
okay.
No.
So
Keep going.
this is the aggregate, and then in my document, my spreadsheet that was I probably authored 95%, and Scott and Mike contributed the other to point out where I made mistakes and missed things, but it's a pretty good working document. I'm showing this in a PowerPoint tonight, so it's not a live working document. If we ever want to sit down and do that, I can certainly bring the Excel file, but I did not bring that tonight.
Oh, we're not going to see,
Right.
Oh, you could? We can go get it.
Okay.
Or I'll log in and I'll find it, and I'll run upstairs and grab a hold of it.
okay,
It'll take me just a minute.
okay. But wait, that's what, before you change the channel, before, do you want to talk about footnote 2, your charter school?
I will show that in just a second. It's on the next, it's on the next page.
So I'm sorry, going through, that looks like you kind of outlined the various expense areas.
Yep.
What are your assumptions on revenue? Are you going to get into that, or?
I wasn't going to get into that because they're fairly, on the revenue side, fairly minor adjustments. I think it added about 800,000 each year out into the future, other than the adjustments for 16.
So what school, our state funding is going to be and all those types of things are
Was as it was in the forecast.
from last year?
From October, right.
And that was
And the
3,
fact that we're $8 million better on state funding, you didn't carry that forward, or?
You know, we recast state funding altogether using the formula and those variables.
trying to remind, that was assuming it would go up 3%.
7.5%.
Okay, 7%. No, Tim, I thought that was there was a good follow-up.
Well, and for the next meeting, what we can do is I'll bring this in the 5-year forecast format, and then you'll see historically
So-
how that's working out.
So while we're on the revenue assumptions, this might be a good spot. Do you want to just mention, your research on abatement and abatement roll-offs as well?
I can, I have not yet done a timetable on those. I believe we've got the data. If not, we'll certainly get that. After our conversations about that timetable, I explained exactly what we wanted to do when I talked with the folks in the city. And their concern as well as mine is that as they roll off, they seem to be adding abatements as we go. So generally, it could be a net wash. So I hadn't added a line just to track abatements because I don't know what I'd put on in terms of abatements going on. I don't want to just do abatements coming off because there are abatements probably going on. It would be my...
I think we should add a line. And then I think also, as things come on, we would put it on there. Because I think then it's about showing the community what's being abated and how, so that there's accountability for that in relation to how it affects our budget.
Okay.
I mean, so we don't want to spend, I hear you, in some ways, we don't want to spend the money before we've got it.
That would be my position, yes.
But I think also we would want to look at the year-over-year changes. So if, we think we're going to be getting in, but, what's that change look like? And so we have a reference point for that.
Are you talking about residential abatements? So that's sort of with the abatement
Commercial.
without the
Commercial.
abatement?
Commercial.
Partial, right.
Commercial.
Oh, commercial,
Yes,
thank you.
commercial.
Okay.
Frog? Frog? Fraud
No.
protection.
Wouldn't it also include like the downtown abatements? I mean, those are resident. Are you?
Well,
Real estate.
That's what
Real
I'm talking
real estate.
about. Okay.
Residential.
Yeah. That's where I was.
That's what I was
said
talking
when
about,
I said, yeah.
downtown.
what I want to make sure, though, is that we don't just factor in, like you said, factor in the positives without having, I just don't know how to predict future development.
I think it's important not to predict, but just to say, here's where we are at this point in time.
Absolutely.
Because, so we can watch the movement and then say, hello, we got to fund the schools.
Okay. All right.
And nobody wants to pay real estate taxes, but
Let me noodle that a little bit,
Yeah.
because I want to make sure, in our revenue projections for real estate property taxes, I'm sure the impact of abatements coming on and going off are melded in there somewhere.
And
Yeah.
the idea of teasing those apart, I think, would provide.
If we can, as you said, tease those apart, we'll look into that.
well, that's where I thought we were. I think there are a lot of folks, I think, wants to make sure that we're factoring that in, or we're watching that.
Okay.
So, not just being completely passive on, oh, I guess here's our money.
Where some people imagine it to be bigger than it actually is.
Exactly.
So if we
I
can
think that's what
actually
you'll find.
say,
Yeah.
here's what it is, then, it is what it is, but it's.
Right. And then can judge, is it, is the cost benefit? I mean, probably it would show the return on that investment is good.
And that perception is like with TIFs. If you don't understand that in the city of Columbus, they don't do school district TIFs, and we're made whole, you might think that you hear about TIF financing and you think that the schools are being harmed.
Yeah.
The city of Columbus has had a long-standing policy of doing non-school district TIFs. Up to this point, as of 10 till 5
We're not gonna hold
on
you
April
to it, yeah.
14th.
Okay, so
Okay.
other thoughts on so just comments on the revenue line. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do that. We then have a tab in this spreadsheet for every object line that we went in and pulled out some of the lower priority items. And here is payroll. You can see I showed exactly what I did to trend out to 21. That's where I added that in. Right. I should have a pointer somewhere.
There you go.
Right there? Good. Adjustment to five-year forecast based upon FY16 projected costs. So you can see the impact of that coming in under plan, what impact it had on 17, 18, 19, and 20. And remember, I adjusted for the assumed base increases. So you see that 17 went from 1.1% to 2.2 assumed, so it's a much smaller adjustment. But in the out years, you get a much larger adjustment, so we pulled that out. And then the priority request for...
That's right, I'm not sure I followed that.
I had in the forecast 1% and 1%. When we looked at what is actual, it was 2.2, so this should go up. And this went from 1 to 0, so that should go down. Overlaying that then is the impact that the change of that $5 million under plan in 16 did to the basis going forward.
Right.
Okay, they're melded together on that line.
So the cumulative effect of the 2% in the subsequent years, is that on a different line item?
No, it's right there.
Because it seems like it more than offset the 1% in the next year. You know what I'm saying? Did you accelerate it in year one from 1% to 2%?
Right,
And then you took from 1% to 0.
right.
It seems like that 1% additional in the prior year would offset that.
Would bring that up.
That's just expressed on another line or something.
Yeah, I'll have to show you the numbers. It worked, that's all. I'm sorry, I don't have all the details. Part of it in that line is that 16 projected cost brought that base down in 16, against which you add
Additional 1%.
the additional, right.
Yeah. It
And
just
then
feels like
take
it's
it out.
cumulative, that's why I was struggling why it bounced
Oh,
back.
why, are you, so why it goes from 394 to 10 million, is it?
Right. with
Okay.
So you think I'm taking up too much?
It don't know. It just, I'm trying to understand it.
All right, I'll get more calculations.
Yeah.
That's why we're here today.
Please, I think that's a great question.
Okay? Priority requests for staff in 17 are here, 20 certificated, 19 and a half classified. We made a base assumption about what that all-in cost would be. It's a placeholder and its impact there, so that's personnel. No personnel is in this forecast for anything beyond 18 or beyond.
And we have a slide further on that outlines.
Details those, yes,
Those, okay.
what those are.
And no other major benefits shifts?
From the forecast.
Those are all in the baseline.
Right, yeah. And
Whatever
what we had in the forecast in terms of, I think it was 4 to 5% increase in health insurance costs over the life of the forecast, those kinds of things they stay in there. All we considered was what's different from the October forecast today. Put that in there. What are those lines?
And I think we already adjusted for the Cadillac tax going away.
Right.
Does that had been?
Under purchase services, these first two lines, because charter schools appear in two objects, 478 and 479, these are the two lines where we made an adjustment. The original and the aspirational budget was a flat percentage increase from year to year to year, and that percentage increase was based upon what happened in fiscal 15, which was an aberration because of our economic disadvantage funding mechanism change and the impact it had on the cost of those pupils that leave the district. That changes, that kind of a radical 20% jump in the number is not expected to continue. So we did go back, trend our enrollment numbers, trend the cost numbers, and use those trended numbers to, I think it's 1,100 kids per year and a trended cost. I don't have that per pupil cost, but we did that, substituted that in, and we're able to back out a significant number out of that aspirational budget request. We then went through, and this is detail out of the departmental budgets as to what they prioritized that could go to, in this particular case, we allocated them to a bond issue. Some of this could be funded by a permanent improvement levy. It just depends on how we want to fund them down the road. So you can see here a pretty detailed description of what was once in the aspirational budget that was part of what you saw and now is not in this forecast. Again, we're preparing the forecast for May as we know it in May. There'll be another step where we get to an actual ask budget for future funding, okay?
So
We need to get this forecast in place.
So I have a question, this is
Yes,
maybe
ma'am.
more for Dr. Good or Scott, but the phone system, is that, when we replaced did that initial replacement of the customer service lines for the bus, the bus customer service calls, is this IP phone system, we talked about how we would do that, and then we were planning another upgrade then, and part of that upgrade would then be for additional, customer service, et cetera. Is that what would that take that out then?
Could you hear that question, Annette?
Yeah, the phone system is, in fiscal year 18, our current contract with AT&T ends, and at that point, they're looking to replace the current phones with an IP phone system, so it's a district-wide phone system.
Oh, so this is a savings then from that then? Would that-
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an
Okay.
expenditure, but will result in a savings, because that, in the long run, will be cheaper for our phone service.
Great. So it's just a net
Cost
number
avoidance.
as opposed to not doing it.
Is there an offsetting capital request to enable that? That's over the capital budget? Or?
Hang on. This was in their budget to expend $3 million to buy that. I'm not clear on how you're interpreting the conversation. What these items were in the aspirational budget. So since we're talking about that line item, district IP phone system, they had in their aspirational budget $3 million to purchase this system. For the purposes of preparing the forecast and identifying capital items that could be funded by another revenue source, we back that out. So unless we go to step 2, which is the ask budget, and find funding for that, these aren't in.
So this is straight what we look at in May and submit to the state as 5-year forecast.
Correct.
Oh, because it says bond, so
We
it's
started
moved
off this
over.
conversation looking
Okay.
at an overlap version, though.
I'm sorry.
That included the aspirational budget, both non-personnel and personnel. So we started off looking at what this would look like overlapped on top of each other. But now we transitioned to actually looking
Well,
at,
what I showed you, the summary page I showed you
Yeah.
has these changes.
Yeah.
This is the net iteration of that. Okay? And what we're doing now is I'm telling you, was it last FAC meeting, you heard all the budget presentations, and they would have said, one of the items is to purchase an IP system. I'm now telling you that, so that we can adopt this forecast, we've identified items to pull out. We've pulled, in this example, the IT phone system out and said, if you want to do that, If that becomes a priority, you need to find another funding source because it's not in this forecast. Okay? So it's pretty specific.
The contracted services, the $5 million across the bottom, what is that?
Maurice. Contracted services for supplemental trades, y'all can come up. We're getting lots of questions.
Yeah. Dom had to leave again, so
You had to step up.
he had a work issue.
The contracted services is the dollar amounts that's in our buildings and grounds budget. It's for additional, if I don't want to use the term outsourcing, but supplemental services such as to utilize to address like heating and cooling issues or HVAC system and those type of things. So it's additional line item that we have on the property services.
And is it a capital item or is it more of a, we're not going to do that?
We're not going to do that.
And in this iteration from a prioritization perspective?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, now I
So,
was
let me ask
thinking
you-
it was not, we were moving it over to bond versus not doing it. Is that?
Well, that decision hasn't been made. We have to present a budget that lives within our means, and that's what we're showing you now. We've pulled everything out of the aspirational budget in the event the revenue doesn't increase due to some other valid issue. So that's our obligation, is present you a balanced budget, and also, per your direction, have a positive cash balance in FY18. So that's what this reflects, and we're showing you what's been removed from what we shared on our aspirational budget. Those things have been removed, though, are priorities 2 and 3. Priority 1s are still in there. If there's a roof that would have failed, that's priority 1. It's still in the budget that's within our means.
Okay. Perfect.
And the fact that we marked everything bond except for the charter school stuff, because we knew that's actually out. That wasn't the right number. But that was just for display purposes, really.
So there will be another iteration that starts to talk about how do you fund it?
Right.
What's a capital, what's an operating?
There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
So I think one of the items that would be helpful to understand, because it's just so dramatic, is a better understanding that charter school adjustment. Not now, just, you
Well,
know,
I can tell you, it was prior year plus 20%. It was just too much. So we used a trend. We went back and looked at 9 years of history of the per pupil cost, and 9 years of history of the enrollment changes, and just simply trended it.
and the 20% was not based on any,
1 year, 15. Remember when we went to community eligibility and the per pupil amount that we would receive for economically disadvantaged pupils jumped? Well, we're capped, remember? So it jumped and our calculated formula went up, but what we received didn't. But what did happen was the students that leave our district that are in that category took those additional dollars with them.
yeah, that's what this.
And that's when it jumped in 15. And when that was first forecasted, they used that year as the basis and said, well, we don't want to be short. These are deductions. We can't turn that faucet off or on. So let's not be short. Well, we all, it rolled up, and after the presentation, we didn't stop looking at this after those initial presentations. So as we're going through it, very frankly, the three of us says, we don't think that's right. And then we went back and had a conversation and reduced it.
So I think what would be helpful is understanding that trend line.
Okay.
Because that's really material. And so if it went from 20% to 2%, does that feel relevant?
Easy. I've got the data.
Can we maybe add that as a footnote or as a slide? So just so we have some explanation of that.
Sure.
Excellent.
And so that you know, because that was a surprise, not only to our district, but other districts that were on community eligibility, that when you went to a non-district school, and I remained in a non-district school, because of community eligibility and that economic disadvantage, additional $900 that I should have gotten, Columbus didn't get it because we're on the cap. You got it, and you took that to your community school or your parochial school, wherever you may attend. So we've worked with the State Department since then to look at a new algorithm that reflects the direct cert from sort of like Jobs and Family Services, direct certs those that are economically disadvantaged. And so it'll be closer to a reflection of what our actual free and reduced lunch eligibility is. They were counting 100% of our students as free and reduced lunch, and that's why that number was so significant. I know that doesn't explain it well, but I want you to understand it also triggered legislative action on our part.
It was more than just not forecasting.
It was.
Actually a change in the,
That's right.
in the regs.
That's right.
Good. It would be great to clarify and I think to demonstrate the due diligence that's gone into
Which is such a large
the
line
number.
item to understand
Yes.
that better.
Yes, yeah,
Very
great
foolish
feedback.
algorithm they used.
That's great.
Supplies and materials, the items that have been pulled out from the aspirational budget are these: textbook replacement, replenishment, and elementary reading books. You can see that's what they had in their aspirational budget viewed here. We pulled that out. I assume it'll be funded from another source. Good?
Any questions so far? Okay. Yes, I think just,
Any more questions?
no. Right.
Point of clarification.
Since the last question, how about that?
And now we get into a rather large list of capital outlay items that clearly will be, potentially funded by bond issue. This was in the aspirational, and again, we've rolled it out. I believe that there are at least 2, maybe 3 pages worth you have before you.
Hold on, before you flip quick, I just to see if anyone has any questions. I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Very much.
Yes.
Kudos to whoever developed that budget to give that detailed explanation. Maurice and his team. It's very easy when we ask for these priorities because of the budget process. It was very easy, just procedurally. I said 7 years, and we could copy and paste. It was very easy. These are the ones out. They were highlighted, and for me, that whole process that we went through makes it easy to get into these different iterations. So that work was not for naught. Well, I don't know what that saying is, but it really helps now as we get into various iterations that we'll be able to do that sometimes in real time for you.
So is that capital outlay, then, I'm assuming this will become a line item for, for capital projects, as opposed to previous efforts to address it? This will have its own little line item to be implemented. Before we post...
Not in the general fund.
Right.
It won't be a line item. It would be a line item in a capital projects fund.
Okay.
That does not exist.
That's right. It doesn't exist today, but
Correct.
this is proposing that it will.
That is correct.
And once we
Without-
see
reduced
the
by the-
Excel spreadsheets, it'll
That's
show
right.
that then.
Right. Okay.
But
this
Stan will
is-
run up and get pretty soon.
Okay.
So, yes, the things were prioritized, so it was easy, but it was also painstaking. And so we're making decisions to not upgrade lighting. We're making decisions to not fill potholes, things that weren't absolutely essential.
Right.
So I don't want to diminish the fact that Maurice was up until one morning 2:08, the next morning 3:43 is when he was generating new iterations of, all right, we can pull this out, and we can pull this out in order to ensure we have that cash balance in FY18. But there are very real consequences of that, and it's not an easy task to make those decisions about this stage will not be repaired this year.
Right.
It's not something that's going to kill us, but a roof falling in could.
Right.
And so they're tough decisions. There's nothing easy about it.
And to that point, you have on this slide that's up right now, security equipment. Is that, I guess I'm just wondering, is that is that sort of secondary security equipment or?
Yes, these are things like visitor management systems, so we know who's in our buildings. upgrades to look at the frequencies in our building so you can get communication throughout the entire facilities.
Right.
Those-
Oh, okay, okay.
So the things like instead of signing in on a notebook, you actually have a digital sign-in and a pass card then, so easier ways to keep track, do background checks, but again,
Yes. Very good. Okay. Next one.
Back to personnel. As I mentioned earlier, total of 39 and a half, 20 certificated, 19 and a half classified. And here's a description, department, of what's proposed in the 17 budget line. Now, I have no comments on that. That would be Scott, Dave.
Nor does this committee.
Right.
I will indicate, I made an error in the spreadsheet I sent to you with Scott. So the Northgate Intermediate School, which is listed as Northgate Middle School, I'd indicated 2 custodians, it's 1 custodian, and the line that I didn't insert was the special education supervisor for occupational therapists. We're bound by limits of numbers of therapists that can be supervised by a supervisor. So we had to add a supervisor when we increased the OTs of the occupational therapists.
So the total's the same, it's just a
But the
shift.
classifications are different, so it's actually 21 certificated and 18.5 classified, but still, yes, 39.5. The board was gracious last year in looking at the overall FT and understand we may have to do some shifting relative to positions, provided we stay within the FT equivalent allocation.
I would just say, I think in this presentation at least demonstrates generally what's in the budget and what we're looking at, so.
It helps.
I would call out too, if you look at the special education numbers, again, these are compliance figures. So essentially half of the new FTE again are to remain in compliance. Remember that we are now off the corrective action plan. So the blessing and the curse is we've become a destination for special education services because of the robust offerings, continuum of services available in each neighborhood. So, but along with that additional special education identified personnel, you have to have staffing.
What are teachers on special assignment?
Teachers on special assignment don't have direct classroom instruction responsibilities. They may be teacher coaches, they may be curriculum coordinators.
Oh, okay.
It's a way to offer teachers leadership opportunities without reclassifying them as administrators. And then they can return to the classroom at some point. Oftentimes you'll spend a couple of years in that position and then return to the classroom and take your new expertise with you.
I did have one other question. So do we not have to add nurses? Or this right now does not add any nurses?
This right now doesn't add nurses. We're
Okay.
continuing to meet the mandates through sharing nurses across buildings. There are a number of things that are not in here. For example, we had projected the addition of instructional assistants, 1 for every 2 primary classrooms in all of our priority schools, because there are priority schools. They're schools that have chronically poor performed. And so versus making class sizes even smaller, in some cases they are, most cases not, we listened to our faculty and staff who asked for that additional set of hands in those classrooms in order to better differentiate. It doesn't include additional social workers, it doesn't include additional counselors or licensed school nurses, and those 4 categories were the largest number of FTE we had proposed in our aspirational budget. Next then would be additional safety and security personnel for our buildings, remembering that one of the common themes, not necessarily reflected explicitly in the goals of the board, though, was the physical, social, and emotional safety of our children. And so those 4 categories would be direct services and support for that.
So can we show, okay, so I think Stan's are you getting your spreadsheet? Is that what?
I'm seeing if I can get to it without running upstairs, so.
I guess I'm bearing with, in the meantime, so for those prioritization, could we, I mean, I think it would be important to show that in a chart of what's not, what
Sure.
would
We
be
have that.
in, what would be in with the next tier, priority 2, if we were able to do 2s. Because I think we need to align that with, here's the priority 2 budget, and then with the spreadsheets that we're going to see, then, how that applies.
I guess the question is on your priority too, if the funding source was bond financing or some other source, this budget as proposed doesn't have the capability to support debt service. So I guess we run that analysis to show that if we were to go out and do bonds, we could support it with this budget that says, hey, you'll have a balance left over about $4.5 million. Is that available? Some of that would be available for debt service if you were to finance this stuff. Does that make sense?
Well, I think they'd include it in the
The
bond.
bonds cover the debt service, right?
Yeah. But the other
Cover
thing
the
is,
principal and interest.
Gretchen, I think to do the bonds, I don't think we even can do the bonds without voter approval. Is that right?
Right.
No one can.
Okay.
So we'd have to, no matter what, and once the spreadsheet comes up, I think we'll see it.
Okay.
I'm going to have to run upstairs. I
Okay.
think it's actually on my desktop.
So, but let me just read, there's really six categories of employees in that tier 2, and they do include those 11 nurses, those 48 instructional assistants for our priority schools, 15 social workers, 10 guidance counselors, and then a number of specialists that address truancy and attendance for the district, and then also 17 safety personnel, student safety resource coordinators. So that comprises that tier 2, but again, all address what we've said is important, what our community is telling us is important, what the city has listed as a priority, but again, aren't a statutory mandate for us, so therefore move to priority 2. But it's still something we ardently feel is important.
Do you want to go get
You
it?
got 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
I was billing this as the star of the show.
I'm
So-
terribly sorry.
Are you doing the simulations next? Is that what you're doing?
So everyone will take a 5-minute break and reconvene here in a couple minutes.
That's good, so they'll show different scenarios, if we add in the number 2s, and you don't have to say.
You're not being here, so I'm not blocking the view.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for being here. Good
So
luck
next on the
tonight.
agenda is the superintendent's budget.
Well, actually, I'll scoot over here. Sure.
There you go.
So I can see everybody. Dr. Good has to be 3 places at once at 6 o'clock. So, okay. Stan, take it away.
This is my,
I'm gonna sit over here.
it's a spreadsheet, you know? It's a notebook. And everything that I gave you is on the tab here in the spreadsheet. And this is where we began with the aspirational budget and the changes to the 5-year forecast. And each one of these tabs represents the changes that I shared with you, payroll, purchase services, and whatnot. The culmination of this, and I have to resize this because of the monitor we're working with. Is a tab that looks like this. And here at the top, these rows here, are placeholders for where we are beginning. That's the aspirational budget with the items pulled out, the capital items and textbooks and the adjustments we made to the chartered school line. Okay, so this is just a placeholder to show you where we are. 18 was an objective to have a budget plan that about 18 positive, and we're still showing the negatives out in 19, 20, and 21. And these lines here, right here, lines 10 through 16, bring that data forward, but allows us to do iterations on operating millage requests to see what it would take in operating millage to fund whatever we put into this model. Currently, if our objective is to make 2021 positive, we can calculate millage fairly easily in this spreadsheet. I would point out, this was a request of Member Hudson, those 2 lines. One of the best practices is to have a policy on an ending cash balance. It ranges, the recommendations range from 30 to 90 days, 1 month to 3 months of operating cash. I tend to use 30 days as a benchmark, and so that's what I've calculated here. We use 30 days of expenditures or projected expenditures. So we add that line, and then the very bottom line is where are we short of meeting that objective? So as I've said in the past, our goal is not zero, and 4 or 5 million positive, as you can see when we have variances, that can increase or decrease and be dissipate fairly easily. So if you're shooting for that 3-day target,
Or 30.
from a financial, from my perspective as trying to help everyone financially plan for the district, not educationally plan. I can help you do the financial planning. I would suggest that you manage your revenue and expenditures such that over a certain period of time, 4 or 5 years, whatever your target is that you look to maintain those balances. And that when you see your balance dip below those targets, that's an indication that you need to react. School districts can reduce expenditures, increase revenue, or do a combo of the two. But this is an indicator that you need to react in the future. So we have that there, and as you can see, it kind of exacerbates the problem out there, so that 18, well, in fact, 17 doesn't look that good. We don't meet the target in 17 next year. We don't meet it in any of the years in the forecast, except for 16. We're not out of cash, we just don't hit our target. And so this is the spreadsheet, member Hudson referenced, and it is live, and you can plug in numbers. What I attempt to do what I do down here, have a spot where you can enter millage. You can select the year that you vote. I didn't go beyond 18, but we certainly could write that in there if you want. You can pick your home market value. It calculates assessed value at 35%. That is our current effective operating millage for residential properties. It does not include bond. It does not include permanent improvement. Just operating millage. Shows what that home payer currently pays. If we propose a new levy, that would be the new tax, and then ultimately the total bill for the property owner. Understand too that all of our existing millage, correct me if I'm wrong, were adopted prior to the elimination of rollback. So heretofore you used to get a 12.5% break, and the state would pay that. It's gone. So you don't get that break anymore.
So do you want to show an example?
Do you? This is the matching, and I would say, and this is the aspirational budget that we showed you with all, the capital items taken out, only FTE for 17. So I would suggest that this wouldn't be our ask budget, because the idea is that we're supposed to run the school district for, remember our vision? Well, this doesn't address the vision like our aspirational budget does. And then down below, you mentioned a bond issue. I did factor in here. Come on, there we go. Based on what we pulled out 153 million, and this chart in $50 million increments actually shows you what ballot millage for the bond issue would be under two assumptions: 25-year bond using 5% interest, or a 30-year bond issue, again with 5%. So in this particular case, you just interpolate in between the two, if you would, but I think it's close enough that if we did a 30-year bond issue for 153 million, it'd be 1.1 mils, roughly. I don't know if you can see that very well. But it gives you a pretty good idea. You can ballpark. This is very macro level, so it gives you an idea of where we might be. So if you desire...
Can I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
get clarified? So right now, the current effective operating is like 39 mils or something?
39, yes.
So whatever you plug in there, is that does that on top of the 39
Yes,
or
ma'am.
instead of? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
it's on top of it.
Okay.
So if you vote 5, it becomes 44.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think so this would show, I think two things. One, if you demonstrate, so what's the range of millage? And the second thing is, what the difference is if it would be voted on, what the difference is.
Sure.
So if you do, 3 mills in 2016, how many mills is that if the vote moves to 17?
Sure. And I could, pick a target. What would you like it to do? You want to be just cash positive in 21? You want to hit your 30-day target in 21?
Yeah, show the third,
You
yeah.
tell me.
Yeah.
30 days.
Hit the 30-day target, yeah.
Because I don't want
Oh,
you
we-
nervous, so hit the
So
30
fasten your
days.
seatbelts.
There you go.
Anybody want to, I don't mean to turn this into, this is serious, this isn't a game, but do anybody want to posit a guess at 8.9 million per mill?
Can't see.
8.9.
Let's just try 10.
That's
Let's
6.
just try.
Okay, 10.
Let's try
It's around
10.
It's around 10.
Where am I?
Down a little bit more.
There you go.
Hang on. I'll turn on the number key, Pat. That would help.
Oh, it turned black.
All turned black. So we can move that down.
Yeah. But I think what that signals right away is that the aspirational budget, certainly pulling out the capital items is important, but I think also we have to ratchet that down. It has to be, the priority 1 items, but, we're not going to be able to get to all those priority items.
And this millage number is just levy, or that also includes a bond?
Just operating.
This
Okay.
is just operating.
Yeah.
I just changed it to 7.
So what
Now
is it?
again, remember the context. You asked, we have the vision, we had an aspirational budget, and we have pared that back for the purposes of preparing our forecast. Only FTE for 17 is in this model. All those capital items are pulled out. So if you were to go for additional funding, I would suggest that you wouldn't use this expenditure plan. That expenditure plan would be different. We would go back and we would add an FTE for 18, 19, 20, 21. We would make sure that you're going to propose funding for the capital items in addition to the operating funding. And we could, I don't have the numbers here.
So would that be something we could, for our next meeting, we could look at that and,
Right.
add that in to see what then that looks like?
You could. And I would just say, as we move to that next phase, I want to make sure that we're all good on subject to answering some of the detailed questions that you've asked, that our forecast is 98, 99% okay in that context. And then the next iteration is, well, from
What's the
Dr.
world
Good,
in order to-
what do we really want to put in? What is the program we want to operate?
Well, I would just say, I think it seems right now, so we've pulled out the capital items. It seems that we would still need to see what are the other items that would come out. If it's a less than aspirational, but, so I'd say aspirational is the Cadillac. What's the Buick level and what's the
Right.
Chevy level?
Right.
Which is the 1s, 2s, and 3s potentially, or however they prioritize it.
On the general revenue.
Right.
General fund side. And that was, so we had mostly the bond, the items that would move to a bond issue. So would there be sort of a next layer of items that would come out?
I can't speak for Dr. Good. I would think that one of the next iterations would be, what staffing do you want to put in?
Right.
Look at that for 18, 19, 20, 21. What staffing do you want to put in? Because that's where we spend our money. This is how we do this business, is with people. So I'd be putting the staffing in and see what that number looks like. And then that would generate the amount that, well, now we have to go back to other priority non-personnel items and back those out. I would do it in that iteration so that we know what we need to make room for.
We've not asked our budget managers to cut, to reduce beyond what you see here. With the capital items, including select capital items and the textbooks pulled out, that's as far as we've directed them to back out.
I thought you had everything prioritized, 1, 2, 3.
And only one is in
The
there.
ones are in there.
Priorities 2 and 3 aren't there.
And you still got to trim. So you got to trim your ones,
Not true of the non-personnel items.
is what they're saying.
We've trimmed this to still maintain a positive cash balance in FY18. So to fund anything beyond that would require additional
Honor the
resources.
ones without
Right.
the ballot.
Yeah, I just,
Short term.
my thought process is there's been so much deferment, at some point, you're gonna reach obsolescence on some of this stuff if you haven't already done so. So that's my concern. It's just something to give thought. I mean,
But our role is not to
That's not-
prioritize.
No. But I
the board,
think,
but for our perspective, it's,
but I do.
this is
Yeah.
the fiscal process that you go
Yeah.
through to prioritize and what is the funding requirements.
I think that we need that, the board is going to need that, though, to make those decisions.
Yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
want 4 different scenarios and different levels of aggressiveness.
Yes.
And what does that buy from a
Yeah.
village perspective?
yeah.
Yeah, and I had understood that today we would have those alternatives in there. So we have some of the alternatives in there, but I guess I thought they went deeper than what you were suggesting that they
I think
did,
we were
that they
gonna bring
do.
up the additional staffing piece, which went deeper on the 26th. So we didn't
Oh.
have that for this, we did not,
Okay.
we weren't preparing that for tonight.
Okay,
Our goal so far was to get an iteration that works for a forecast, if we all understand those assumptions, and we want 18 to be positive. So that's the forecast that we would adopt. And
Absent any additional support.
that is correct, yes.
And then you're.
By the way, let me-
Additional support.
Let me mention this, in adopting this forecast, I am not permitted to assume new funding.
right.
And so we have an interesting timing issue. We're here in May, or where are we? April, I'm sorry, April. We'll go through however many other, and I apologize if I said this is easy. It's not easy for everybody to do this, but the result of their work made my job easier in putting it in here. I didn't, everybody had all fed up, and I went, great, boom, there it is. That was the easy part. Getting here was not easy, it was painful, so I apologize if I inferred anything different. But here we are in April, we'll have another meeting, go through other iterations as we choose. We adopted in May the forecast. In June, we'll adopt the FY17 appropriation resolution, or budget, if you will, and begin operations in 17. When we get to October, we have to do another forecast. Only this time, it's 17 through 21, just like the budget document that Scott's prepared. The years roll back. Now my first 2 years are not 17 and 18 being positive or negative is an issue. Now my years are 17 and 19 becomes an issue. And regardless of any additional funding we might be seeking, we will not know that by the time that forecast needs to be adopted. So we're going to adopt a forecast probably that looks very similar to this. Have to wait to see if there's any other funding coming along and recast the forecast after that, which will look like one of our iterations. See what I'm saying? We're going to have an iteration of this that looks like our forecast, our financial plan, our educational plan for the next 5 years, post additional funding, whether that's operating or bond or PI. And I keep throwing those options out there because they represent 3 different funding mechanisms for us. been very clear, and I agree with you, capital should be funded as capital. Long-term capital with long-term funding, that spells bond issue. Ongoing deferred maintenance that you can pull out, that you do on a regular year-to-year basis, I recommend that you look at a PI levy. That generates a fixed dollar amount every year that we would have available for those kinds of.
Do you want to show that?
It's down here at the bottom. There are no numbers in there because we did not cast anything for a PI levy, but it does provide for that. And what I do is that whatever we pull out for PI year to year to year, I average it because you have to, 1 mil gets you $8.9 million a year. So, yes, sir.
So just for the listening audience, consuming audience who are going to see this or hear this or possibly read something, this is not definitive at this point.
No, sir.
Because there are many other assumptions that have to be included, A, and B, because there's going to be a process that will obviously be recommended for a millage piece, for a millage committee per se, that would then use this tool to help guide their work, to make recommendations to the board to deliberate on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I just want the listening public to understand that there's nothing definitive coming out of this per this presentation. Despite whatever numbers were plugged in, it's very clear that there's still a number of assumptions that must be made.
Just a demonstration of the tool.
That is correct, that is correct.
Just want to be clear.
And
Right.
up to this point, it's something that from the finance side that we're very pleased about is that up to this point and hopefully going forward, the program drives this budget. Program drives this budget. And this is not lay a ruler and just trend, except in the way out years where I have to. Program drives the budget. Behind every one of these numbers, there's a behavior. And that's important. So when we get to the point where, as we said, we're going to put some things in and take some things out, we will know that, well, we'll just take $5 million out of other. No. We're not going to buy the fund system.
Well, and that's
the kind of thing
piece,
we'll be able
yeah.
to do.
But and I didn't mean to put the cart before the horse, but I thought that would be in this presentation today, knowing we still had placeholders for personnel.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the work that it took to get us to, how do we, only 17 FTE, and then all the work to pull out the capital and get that first target of let's make 18 correct. We need some more time to go through those iterations, and maybe we need to clarify that either now or offline as to what, how many do you want to see? Are there certain parameters you'd like to see? Because what this model provides us is the ability, like when I started, I said, what would you like to do? Do you want to make 21 positive cash? Do you want to make it hit the 30-day target? Do you have a millage limit? All of those parameters and limitations can be put in this to generate the numbers. And you can work at it from this angle, or you can work at it from this angle. You can do a little bit of the both. But if you've got things in terms of budgetary parameters you'd like to see, let us know, and we'll have those
But that's where
available.
I think that's what I understood. We have priority 1, 2, 3 items. So what does that look like from an expenditure standpoint? What does that look like if you carry forward, if it's, we take out 3s
Okay.
and you have 2s in there, or
And that would be personnel, non-personnel alike, correct? I don't know if we've categorized personnel as 1, 2, and 3s for sure. But, so we'll, since we have 3 categories, then are those the 3 iterations that would make sense?
yes.
And is that more of a Scott what is your thought on that?
Venti, Grande, what are the
We
starting
can run these
sizes?
any way you want. I mean,
Instead of-
we have,
Can view
on
it.
the non-personnel and personnel side, everything was assigned 1, 2, or 3 priority. So we have work to do between now and the 26th, because our next work was to come back with a more detailed staffing plan and proposal for FY18 through 21. So the goal for tonight was to hit that 17 number, the detail of that. And then we'll come back the next meeting with the detail of the next 4 years.
And the details Scott was referring to, remember we had the chart that had the description of the positions and whether they're classified or certified in their titles. That's the additional detail for 18, 19, 20, 21.
So-
you're
So
talking
that's where you would see
about.
the nurses and the guidance counselors, social workers, and those kinds of things spelled out.
But I think this, so step one, I think that it does appear, I mean, there are a number of goals that could be reached with some bond funding.
Right.
And moving that over, plus, you know, establishing a permanent improvement fund.
Textbooks
So
and
that would get to what the committee had advised previously of kind of stabilizing that funding and catching up those items, but, you know, without, you know, substantial millage increase.
That's right.
And now I think it's about having the tools to look at, you know, on the general fund side. What would that be? And then, so there are decision-making tools for the board and any millage committee. And I think we talked about the last meeting, it seemed that there would need to be millage evaluation, so the board should begin to think about that.
Sure. My math head and matrices are dancing in my head about iterations, because when Scott says we've got 1, 2s, and 3s, you've got 1, 2s, and 3s in personnel, and you got 1, 2s, and 3s in non-personnel. Typically in the budgeting process, one can trade off the other. And so now I've got a matrix of 9 boxes with 9 potential iterations, but we won't believe in that. I think if our marching orders are correct, we'll do the 1s, we'll do the 2s,
Yep.
we'll do the 3s.
That's right.
Right.
And on top of this, where we've pulled out alternately funded items,
That's right.
okay? Does
Right.
that sound good?
Yes.
I still think you have a story, no matter what scenario you run. The outcomes that you're looking to generate from all of them, I think, still
Yeah.
are strong. But now I do understand your toolbox of how to fund them. I think that this certainly provides.
Is this a, do- are you-
It provides the clarity for me, at least for the PI and the bond piece.
Yeah.
That's
Good.
very helpful.
And if you might, since I like my spreadsheet to see the impact, then it's very informative about timing of when school districts request additional funding. You understand that you typically vote in November. It does make a difference. You vote in one calendar year. You don't begin to receive taxes until the next calendar year. And in that next calendar year, you only have 6 months in the current fiscal year.
Right.
Which is why when I plug in this millage, you see that number right there, 31 million, is
Right.
half of 62 million.
Right.
And so if you wait too long, and let's just take an example. Let's use this number right here, 75 million as a target. What do we have to do if we change years to still hit that 75 million target? And this, again, demonstration purposes only. So let's do this, just so we don't forget. We'll put that right there. That's our target now. We'll change this to 17. And then just iteratively, I'm not there yet. This moves on me every time, doesn't it? You there?
Yeah.
9.
9.
Yeah. 9 a year later.
Wow.
Did I hit it exactly?
Pretty close.
And that? Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
So you're kind of assuming, like, you know, the millage is being applied to a pool of properties that some assumptions have gone into that. Is that whatever the current
Yes,
property?
yes.
Okay. So it's possible that we could see increase in numbers and values of that base at the time that the new levy applies.
Absolutely. The only problem is a thing called House Bill 920.
Okay.
And it's a reduction factor, which means if we put 4 mills on, they're going to look at it multiplied times, in this case, 9, a big number, which generates 9 million. for 36 million, okay? Next year, the result of that multiplication has to be 36 million.
You
So if my
explain
base
that.
goes up,
Yeah,
that millage gets reduced.
each year after, but the first
Even
initial,
between, when you go on the ballot, you use the current year's duplicate, but when it's levied on the next year's duplicate.
okay. I was hoping, for some wiggle room that
Yeah,
you
so
might
you'd
see
have-
more
Well, but
revenue
that's,
from
and that's
higher
why
property
the,
values.
moving the items over to bond, some of those items, that's a fixed financing, but then it.
We used
you
to
know,
enjoy
that's-
that until, gosh, the late 70s, when that was put into effect because of the rapid inflationary increases
Okay.
in property values. And so tax revenue, everybody's tax bill was going up very, very rapidly.
Now nobody has that problem except Columbus.
Yeah. And Anyway, that's, but that, valid
Thank
point,
you.
but
Okay.
the way the math works is they, I guess a multiplication that's called the product of those two numbers remains constant.
Okay. But that helps me with the model.
Yeah.
And so I don't assume any growth in assessed value here at all.
Okay.
It's a conservative picture because of that.
So, other feedback on any of this?
It's great.
So, a
No,
good
it's
start?
very helpful.
Good start?
Yeah.
Yes.
There. So
Good.
what we'll do then is, so with this feedback, then follow up in 2 weeks. So we'll have the, more expanded personnel numbers. And as well as some of these additional options. To again, see if this is appropriate, be helpful for the board to weigh this and anyone else that'd be doing the evaluation.
I'll go back and I'll listen to the tape, I think, for all the, I was unfortunately not jotting down all the questions, but we'll try and get that off the tape and answer those questions relative to the forecast, have that format ready for you as well, because that will need to go then the following week to the board for their first hearing and subsequent approval 2 weeks after that.
Just one final thing. Stan and I talked, Stan, you want, one thing we toss around, and maybe we could toss around some more next week. I want to be sensitive of everybody's time, but that we might consider having that May forecast and sort of the no new dollars appropriation resolution, that we do that at the same time, so the forecast reflects that.
Yeah, we're going to have to split those two. It was a great idea of mine, only our budget director reminded me that he won't know about grant dollars until June, those allocations.
Oh.
So we have to delay the appropriation adoption, not for the general fund, but for all the other funds until June. It was a great idea, but that's why we have more than,
Okay.
we got several sets of eyes and people thinking about this, so
Right.
I stand corrected on that. It's a great idea.
I
was
think
all
that the
excited about
state
it.
law, I think the state law makes no sense that you would do a forecast before you know when you have all your money. And then, it's backwards.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I
hard to
appreciate everybody's
plan.
understanding that these things change and that small percentage variances result in some rather large numbers. But I think because we do things in iterations, because we show possibilities of how things might vary, you're not surprised when they come in different. And hopefully we're giving you an adequate explanation of how we've planned, where we made an error in those plans, and where actual behavior didn't come up to predicted behavior. So that's the whole purpose of this committee. So it's good. We appreciate your feedback, and we'll go back and do some more work.
I think we've got one final question, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Just make sure I'm clear. The work that's underway toward developing a facilities master plan is not factored into this in any way.
Correct.
And that whenever that process is completed, perhaps at the end of June or thereabouts, there's clearly likely to be some overlap between this and whatever comes out of that process, both in terms of its impact on operating monies as well as obviously the capital side. Correct?
You are correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct. To the T.
And we don't have a clue what's going to come out of the facilities master plan.
Not at this point, because it too, like this, is full of options.
Right.
Full of options.
Okay.
Hopefully, we got all the tools to assess that.
Yeah.
No,
And this tool
a
is,
wonderful tool.
yeah, this is great. Because I remember doing this in the 80s without any such tool.
Okay.
Well, spreadsheets are my friend.
Other comments or questions for the good of the order? Next, and,
Well, yeah, I do. One question. Did any of you get the chance to look on board docs, in addition to all the work that we had to do and the run around like, what's that phrase, chickens with the head cut? Anyway, all the mayhem that was going on trying to pull this all together, I decided to, put things on board docs to hopefully give a web-based access to the information rather than always through email. So were you able to access board docs if you tried? I know the board members can because it's in the same place.
Well, I
as the board
downloaded
information.
because you also gave us the attachments. So
Yeah.
you wanted us to go and maybe see if
so
we
if
could
you
actually
go
see
to
it
board
live.
docs,
Okay.
go to board docs, you can set up a little account, and then it's so then next time, then you'll get an email that will be from board docs, and it'll say the agenda's been updated, and it will link you to the FAC page. And
Okay.
so it'll say view the agenda, but it'll not only be the agenda, but the whole meeting and all any of these attachments.
And then
So you could bring your tablet to the meeting, connect to the internet, and just look at it here at the table.
Do we need a password for the internet or
No.
how?
There's a guest.
Public.
Okay,
There's a
thank
guest
you.
link here.
Okay, great.
Just might want to come a minute sooner, or it just takes a minute to
Oh, I'll stay
link
after
all
and see
up.
if I
And
can
we
get
also
on.
we do the minutes in there too. We'll type right in the agenda, who was here and how the vote went, and
Yeah.
if there are any particular comments we want to capture, but we do that electronically. It's pretty
It's
cool.
good that it's electronic because each category has its own page. So if you print it
Yeah.
out, that's a lot of white space. But it sounds
Yeah.
like if we're looking at it electronically, yeah, it's
Good.
fine.
So thank you. I just want to mention that.
Yes. So,
And that's assuming the internet connection works here.
usually. So, motion to adjourn
So moved.
in a second. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
So we're here.